I still can't shake it. The way she smiled at me that morning, like she'd just noticed me for the first time, even though we've lived in the same building for months. It was absurd, really. I was fumbling with my keys in the lobby, dropping one onto the scuffed tile, and she, my neighbor, mid-40s, impossibly poised, just bent down, picked it up, and handed it back. Her fingers brushed mine for a second too long. My chest did that stupid jumpy thing again. She wore this soft gray sweater, the kind that looks effortless but somehow expensive, and her hair was pulled back in a loose knot that let a few strands curl around her face. I remember thinking, for the briefest moment, that she looked untouchable, like some character from a book I'd never be allowed to read. "Here," she said, her voice quiet but firm, like she was used to people not noticing her at all. And then there was this pause, just long enough for me to wonder if she was studying me, or if I was just imagining it. My mouth went dry, and I muttered something dumb. I think it was "thanks," but it probably sounded more like a squeak. The lobby smelled like damp concrete, and the faint trace of the bakery downstairs, and somehow, the small details, her perfume, the way she tilted her head slightly when she laughed at my clumsiness, felt like they were vibrating in the air just for me. I kept glancing at her as she walked away, and each step made my thoughts spiral in ways I couldn't control. I know I'm being ridiculous. She probably doesn't even remember the moment. But there was something. Maybe it was the way her eyes held a tiny spark of amusement when I apologized again, or the subtle softness in her posture, a hint of openness I wasn't expecting from someone so confident, so sure of herself. Later, I found myself standing in the little hardware aisle she had passed by, pretending to read labels I didn't care about, just to catch another glimpse of her. She was talking on the phone, gesturing with one hand, smiling at something only she could see. And I swear, in that fraction of a second, she looked at me. Really looked, and I felt this odd mix of guilt and exhilaration, like I was trespassing into a world I wasn't supposed to belong to. I shook my head, trying to focus on the hammer in my hand, but her laugh echoed, soft and warm, and suddenly the mundane fluorescent lights of the shop felt too bright, too cold, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. My heart was still thudding, and it occurred to me that I'd been replaying that smile for hours already, like a stupid movie I couldn't stop watching. She moved on, leaving a faint trace of perfume and the ghost of that smile behind, and I was left leaning against the aisle shelf, wondering why a single, simple gesture could make the rest of my day feel off-kilter. I don't know her. I barely know her. And yet, for some reason, I can't stop thinking about her. The way she smiled, the way she looked like she saw me, and how impossible it felt that someone could exist so casually, so close, and still feel completely out of reach. I keep imagining it, over and over. That split second when our eyes met, and the world, for just a moment, narrowed down to her and me. It happened 2 days later. I was carrying a box of old books down the narrow hallway of the building when I heard her voice behind me. "Careful, that's heavier than it looks." I turned, and there she was, sweater sleeves pushed up, hair slightly mussed, holding a clipboard like it was both a shield and a weapon. Her eyes flicked to mine, assessing, unreadable. I noticed the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, like shadows of long days, and for some reason it made her seem even more real, more present, than the glossy images I sometimes imagined of her. Yeah, I've got it," I mumbled, fumbling with the box. She stepped closer, just enough that her shoulder brushed mine, and the scent of faint vanilla and something warm, coffee, maybe, hit me. My fingers lingered on the box longer than necessary, and I caught her glance. It wasn't judgmental. It wasn't playful. It was careful. "Let me help," she said finally, reaching for the edge of the box. There was a pause as our hands met, balancing the weight together. I noticed how strong her fingers were, how deliberate each movement, like she rarely allowed herself to let someone else take control. "You don't have to," I said, though I could hear the hesitation in my own voice. Her laugh was soft, almost apologetic, as if she were embarrassed to admit she wanted the help. "I know. I just haven't slept much, and these are heavier than I remembered." She adjusted the box between us and took a tiny breath, shoulders tense. I noticed how she pressed her lips together, how her eyes softened when she realized I wasn't going to make a joke about it. And for a moment, that briefest of moments, she seemed human in a way that went beyond the confident, untouchable facade she carried in the lobby. We moved slowly down the hallway, carefully balancing the weight. I caught myself staring at the back of her neck, the way her hair curled slightly at the nape, and the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders. I felt an almost guilty awareness of how much attention I was giving her, how completely absorbed I'd become in these small, intimate details. "Thanks," she said softly, almost too quietly to hear. It wasn't the casual thanks of a neighbor. There was something fragile in it, something vulnerable, that made me hesitate before answering. "You're welcome," I said, my voice barely louder than hers, and for a heartbeat, the space between us seemed to stretch, suspended. Then she smiled, small, almost imperceptible, but it carried weight. I felt it like a current, a gentle pull, impossible to ignore. And as we set the box down on the shelf together, our hands brushed again, fleeting, deliberate, and the air between us seemed heavier than it should have been. I stepped back, trying to act casual, but the warmth of her presence lingered, and I realized that this, whatever this was, it had a gravity all its own. And even as she adjusted her clipboard and turned away, I couldn't stop thinking about that quiet, charged moment, the one that felt like the start of something I didn't yet have a name for. It was late. The building's laundry room was quiet except for the hum of machines and the occasional drip of rain sliding down the skylight above. I was folding my shirts when I heard her footsteps, soft but deliberate, approaching. "Hey," she said, her voice careful, almost tentative. She carried a small basket, and I noticed how tired she looked, dark circles under her eyes, a slight slump in her shoulders. The confident posture she always wore like armor was softened, humanized, by exhaustion. "Hey," I replied, my own voice quieter than I intended. I found myself watching the way her hands gripped the basket, the slight tremble in her fingers. It shouldn't matter, and yet I couldn't stop noticing. We fell into an awkward rhythm, folding laundry side by side. At some point, our hands brushed while reaching for the same towel. I pulled back instantly, but her fingers lingered, almost imperceptibly, as if she hadn't minded. My chest tightened. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words lodged somewhere between my throat and the air, unformed. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and visibly stiffened. A name I didn't recognize flashed across the screen. She hesitated, thumb hovering, before sliding it away without answering. There was a quiet sigh, almost like she was giving herself permission to let it go. I realized she was guarding herself even here, in this mundane little space, and it made me ache for her quiet vulnerability. "Long day?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay casual, though it trembled slightly. "Yeah," she admitted, a ghost of a smile brushing her lips. "It's one of those nights." She didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. But the way she leaned slightly toward me when she spoke, just enough that our shoulders almost touched, made my mind spin. The storm outside picked up, rain tapping sharply against the windows. I could see the reflection of her face in the glass, faintly illuminated by the dim ceiling light. Her eyes were fixed somewhere far away, and I needed, to ask her what she was thinking, to tell her how completely captivated I was. But the moment was fragile, suspended, and I hesitated. She bent down to pick up a dropped sock, and our hands met again. My fingers brushed hers, longer this time, and she didn't move away. My pulse raced. My mind screamed to lean in, to close the space between us, but reason held me back. A part of me wanted to wait, to respect the invisible line she hadn't crossed, but another part of me ached to push past it. The sound of the dryer ending made her start slightly, and she laughed, a soft, almost embarrassed laugh, and turned away to gather the rest of her laundry. I swallowed hard, the tension of the moment leaving my chest feeling raw and hollow. I stood there for a moment after she left, staring at the empty room, replaying the brush of her fingers, the tilt of her head, the fragile way she let me in, just a little. And I realized, with a pang I didn't want to name, that for the first time I'd been this close to something I didn't fully understand, something I wasn't sure either of us was ready for. I didn't move. I just stood there, my hand lingering in the air where hers had been, thinking about the almost words, the almost touch, the almost confession. And I knew I'd be haunted by that, almost for days. The rain hadn't let up all evening. I found her in the small hallway outside her apartment, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, staring at the floor. I hesitated before knocking on her door, then just stepped inside when she didn't move. "Hey," I said softly. She didn't look up. "Hey," she murmured back, her voice low, almost fragile. We stood there for a moment, nothing more than two shapes in the dim light, the sound of water sliding down the windows filling the silence between us. I wanted to say something, anything, but words felt clumsy, intrusive. She finally looked up at me, eyes glimmering, raw and unguarded in a way I hadn't seen before. "What are we doing?" she asked, the question falling like a stone in the quiet hallway. Her arms unfolded slowly, but her posture didn't relax. She wasn't asking for answers. She was exposing something fragile inside herself. I swallowed, my chest tightening. I opened my mouth, closed it. I could feel my pulse in my temples. I don't know," I admitted finally, my voice rough even to my own ears. She shook her head, slow and deliberate. "No, I mean really, you me this." Her hand gestured vaguely between us, but there was no accusation, only a kind of desperate curiosity, a need to name what we couldn't. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance, but something kept me from moving. The weight of her stare held me in place. I could see exhaustion in the curve of her shoulders, the way her fingers twitched, the faint tremor in her lips. Every micro-movement screamed vulnerability, and it made the tension between us feel unbearable. "I feel like I shouldn't be here," she whispered, almost to herself. "But I can't leave either." Her honesty hit me harder than any words could have. I realized we'd both been pretending, dancing around something we didn't have names for, something that refused to be contained in polite smiles or brief touches. And now, in the silence, all the unspoken pieces pressed against me like the walls of this narrow hallway. I finally spoke, careful and low. "I don't want to ruin it. I don't know what it is either." She looked down, tracing the edge of the rug with her shoe, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink around us. I wanted to make her laugh, to ease the tension, to dissolve the moment before it could hurt us both. But the truth was raw, and I couldn't move past it. She lifted her eyes, and there it was again, that quiet, sharp honesty. "Maybe we're too close," she said, voice breaking slightly. "Or maybe not close enough." I could feel my chest tighten, my stomach twisting. The words didn't solve anything. They only widened the space between us, made it sharper, made it impossible to ignore. And then she stepped back, leaned against the wall again, and whispered, almost as if to herself, "I don't even know if I want to stop thinking about you, or if I'm afraid of it." I found her in the small courtyard behind the building, sitting on the edge of a stone fountain. She hesitated, fingers tightening around it. Then she exhaled, long and quiet. He was my husband, years ago," she admitted. Her voice was low, steady, but there was a tremor beneath it I couldn't ignore. "We didn't end well. I didn't handle things right." I stayed silent, unsure what to say. The air felt thick, as if the courtyard had shrunk around us. I wanted to reach out, to offer some word of comfort, but her admission wasn't asking for comfort. It was just truth, fragile, raw, and heavy. "I see things in you," she continued, not looking at me. "Reminds me of him. Not in looks, not exactly, but in the way you notice the small things. The way you don't pretend you understand when you don't." He never noticed, really. Her confession hit me unexpectedly. I didn't know whether to feel honored or terrified. I could feel the pulse in my temples, the quickening of my heart, but I kept my hands still, tried to keep my voice steady. I started, but nothing felt enough. She finally met my eyes. There was a softness there, but it carried weight. Years of mistakes, of loss, of longing. "It's complicated," she said, almost whispering. "I thought I was over it. I thought I could move on. But then you smile at me like I matter, and suddenly, it's all back. I wanted to tell her she did matter, that I didn't just notice her because she reminded me of anyone else, but I didn't. The truth was delicate, and I didn't want to break it by clumsily trying to fix it. So I just nodded, letting her words hang, letting the silence carry what I couldn't say. She set the photo down between us, fingertips lingering on the edge. For a moment, it felt like time had slowed, like the courtyard, the fountain, the damp air had all conspired to make this one quiet confession feel like a seismic shift. Then she stood, brushing off her sweater, and glanced at me with something that felt like both apology and invitation. "I didn't mean to unload all that," she said softly. "I just needed to say it out loud." I watched her turn, her back straightening as she walked away, but her glance over her shoulder caught me off guard, her eyes carrying the weight of that confession, that vulnerability. And I realized, as the photo caught the light and shimmered slightly in the wet courtyard, that nothing between us could ever be the same. I stayed there, staring at the image, at her retreating figure, feeling the pull of something I wasn't ready to name, but already couldn't forget. I didn't expect to see her that evening. The building's rooftop was empty, the city lights blurred behind a soft curtain of fog. She was leaning against the railing, arms crossed, the same quiet posture she always used to hide something. I approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "Thought I'd be alone tonight," she said, voice low, almost like she was confessing to herself. "You're not," I replied softly, stopping a few feet away. I didn't know why I said it like that, but it felt right. The rain from earlier had left the air clean, almost electric, and the faint scent of her hair, something warm, like wood smoke, reached me as she shifted slightly. We stood in silence for a long moment, both of us aware of it, neither moving. It wasn't awkward. It was deliberate. A space stretched between us that wasn't just air, but everything unspoken, the brushes of hands, the long looks, the secrets, the confessions. "I keep thinking," she began finally, fingers brushing the railing, "about how close we've been without really being together. I'm not sure how to explain it." "You don't have to," I said, voice low. My own fingers itched to reach out, to bridge that tiny gap between us. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tilt of her head, the way her eyes softened as she studied the distant city lights. Her laugh came then, quiet, almost embarrassed, and she shook her head. "It's ridiculous," she said, "but it feels inevitable. You matter. More than I thought anyone could." I didn't respond immediately. My chest was tight, my stomach twisting with the kind of anticipation that isn't flashy or dramatic, but somehow more consuming because it's real. I stepped a little closer, and she didn't move away. Her fingers brushed mine, almost accidentally, but I let my hand linger. She didn't pull back. The quiet between us deepened, and in that stillness, I realized we didn't need words to acknowledge what was already there. We had both been careful, both been guarded, and yet here we were, just two people in a city rooftop, sharing space, understanding, and trust, and it felt like the most honest thing either of us had done in years. Her hand finally rested lightly against mine, fingertips grazing the back of my hand. It was soft, deliberate, and enough. Enough to know, without saying it, that the tension, the longing, and the hours of stolen glances had led us here. We stood like that for what felt like hours, fingers brushing, eyes tracing the fog over the city, no need for grand gestures or declarations. Just the quiet acknowledgement that we existed for each other in this fragile, earned way. Eventually, she leaned her forehead against my shoulder, and I rested my cheek against the top of her head. No words came. None were needed. The city hummed below us, the night stretched wide, and in that gentle closeness, everything we'd felt, all the small stolen moments, all the confessions and hesitations, finally settled. I didn't want it to move too fast. I didn't need it to. I just wanted this, to exist here, quietly, with her, and to let the inevitable unfold naturally. And in that stillness, I realized that some things, once earned, don't need words at all. I catch myself thinking about that night on the rooftop more often than I probably should. It wasn't a dramatic turning point, No sweeping declarations, no cinematic gestures. Just two people standing close enough to feel the warmth of each other's presence, realizing that whatever this was, it was ours, and it was real. Since then, everything feels quieter, somehow. Not empty, but more present. I notice the little things now. The way she folds her sweater sleeves, the tilt of her head when she's thinking, the sound of her laugh when she's truly amused. And I think she notices me too, in ways that aren't flashy, but persistent, subtle, grounding. We still have our boundaries, of course. Life doesn't pause for anyone. But there's a shared understanding now, a soft, unspoken agreement that the space between us isn't a void. It's a place where trust, patience, and care can grow. I've learned that love doesn't always arrive in a storm of confessions or grand gestures. Sometimes it's quiet, earned, and surprisingly resilient. She's changed too. I can see it in the small, fleeting moments. The way she lets herself smile without reservation. The way she touches my hand without hesitation. The little gestures that say she's aware of my presence and that I matter. There's vulnerability there, yes, but also strength. A strength I admire more than I can put into words. And me? I've realized that noticing someone, truly noticing, is an act of patience, attention, and humility. I don't try to rush or fix. I just let things unfold, let the quiet moments carry their weight. It's taught me more about connection than anything I've read in books or seen in movies. Sometimes, late at night, I replay our brushes of hands, our whispered hesitations, the silent understanding that passed between us on that rooftop. And I realize it wasn't about a single moment. It was about all of them together, accumulating into a subtle gravity that neither of us could deny. We still exist in a world that doesn't pause for romance. But somehow, in the midst of commuting, working, and ordinary life, we've carved out something extraordinary in the quiet, in the details, in the presence we share. It's not perfect. It's not simple, but it is real. And that's enough. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?